Today I'm going to show you how to make this gorgeous little fringe earring. You can make these any size, any colour, with all sorts of different seed beads. These ones are made using 11/0, and we've got some rounds and some hex cut ones in this pair. But you can use any sorts of colours you like, any pattern you like. Let's show you what the materials you'll need. Okay, so you're going to need 2 colours of seed beads. These are round 11/0s. So I have a silver and a dark green. I have obviously my earring findings. I have some thread protectors. I have my needle and my thread, and I'm using Nymo. I'm using Nymo because it has a nice dangle to it, a nice fluid thread. Okay, so to start the design, we're actually going to start with a ladder stitch and then brick stitch, and then we'll fringe off the design. So I'm going to pick up 2 of my silver seed beads and start my ladder stitch. So I've got 2 beads on my thread, and I'm just going to go back up through the bottom of the first bead we put on. I do have a little bit of a tail coming out the other end, just so we can tie it off. So when you've done that, you should have 2 beads sitting side by side. We now need to get ready to add our next bead, so we're going to go down through the second bead we added. So you've got 2 beads. From now on, I'm just going to pick up 1 bead and add to it. So we're coming out the bottom of the second bead. We're going to go back through the top of that second bead and pull. Now we have 3 beads on there. Now we need to situate our needle to add the next bead. So we're going to go back up the bottom of that bead we just added. Okay, now we're going to add another bead. So we're coming out the top of the third bead. We're going to go back in through the bottom of the third bead once we've added our bead on the thread. Now we have 4. So now I'm going to take this. So I've got it coming out the top of the third one, sorry. I'm going to take it down through the top of the 4th one. And that is how you ladder stitch. So one more time. I'm going to go through the top. And then back up through the bottom of that one, and then you can just pull it tighter as you go. Your work will get tighter as you add more rows in, so it's going to be a bit loose there. So I'm just going to continue on doing that stitch until I have 9 beads total. Okay, so I have my 9 beads for the first row, and from now I'm doing brick stitch. So this one was ladder stitch. I'm brick stitching off the bridges, which are these bits of thread in between each row, and I'm actually going to be decreasing the number of seed beads. So I'm going to put 2 beads on my thread, and then I'm going to skip the first bridge and go through the second bridge. So 2 beads, skip that first bridge, and take my needle through the second bridge. And I'm just going to pull gently. Everything's a bit wonky at the moment until you start beading up the row. Okay, so I'm coming out under that thread. I need to stabilise these. So I'm going to go back up through that second seed bead we added. I'm going to go back down through the first seed bead we added to that second row. And then to get it situated for the next one, I'm going to go back up through that second seed bead. And so it's actually tightened everything up, so it's all sitting in place. So from now I'm only adding 1 bead, and I'm going to work through until I have no more bridges left. So I go through this bridge here, and then back up through the bottom of the bead. So I'm going to go through the next bridge. And then back up through the bottom of the bead. Oh, sorry, this looks a bit wonky and a bit unfocused. I'm trying to do it so you can see it on camera, so it's nice and clear. Okay, next bridge. Just adding 1 bead at a time and then going through each bridge, and then back up through the bottom of the seed bead to situate it to add another one until there are no more bridges left in that row. It's got my next bead. Go through my next bridge, and then back up through the bottom. Okay, I'm going to continue on, and then I'll come back to show you the rest of the... Okay, we have 2 rows on now, and you can see the second row there are less beads than the first row. And we're going to continue on for the next row doing the same. So we're taking 2 beads, we are skipping the first ladder, and we're going through the second ladder. Then we're going to stabilize these, so we're going to go back through the bottom of the second bead we added. Oh, and we're going to go down through the top of the first bead we added. And then we're going to get it situated, so we're going to go back up through the bottom of that. Oops, I've got my thread caught. Okay, so we've got our first 2 on. So now we're going to keep adding 1 bead. So you can see the next bridge is here. Taking my needle through, under the bridge, sorry. And then back up through that bead we just added. Another bead. And next bridge. The same thing for this row until you run out of bridges. Okay, so we're starting to decrease our number of beads. So we're going to do the same again for the next row. 2 beads. Skip the first bridge. Go under the second bridge. Slowly pull your beads down. Then we're going to stabilize them by going back up that second bead we added, back down the first bead we added, and back up the second bead we added. And then we're now going to add 1 bead each time between every thread. Just like that. And you're going to keep going until you only have 2 beads left on the top. Okay, so I have 3 beads left. I just thought I'd show you the last row. So I'm adding 2 beads onto my needle. And I'm going to skip the first bridge and go through the second bridge underneath. Okay, and then I'm going to go back up and just stabilize these. Oops, and I got my thread tangled. And just go slow. So that's my base for my fringing. And what I'm going to do now is add a wire protector so that when I add my hardware, all my thread is going to be nice and protected and not rubbing against and causing fray. So basically this is what it looks like, and the thread sits in between and you're going through these 2 loops. So, and I like to do it a few times so I get it, go back down through that hole and then through that C bead. Remember to pull slowly so the thread sits in there. I then tend to just pinch the wire or thread protector in just so it sits nicely on those 2 beads. And now I'm going to go and reinforce it. So I go through a couple of times, maybe 3, sometimes even 4 times, just back, up and down, slowly making sure that that sits into position in that little sort of valley in there. And then let's do 1 more time for good measure. Again, sorry, this is awkward. I'm trying to do this on camera. That's why I look a little bit unco. So there we go. So now when I put the hardware on there, basically the thread isn't going to be rubbing and then you'll lose your piece will fall to pieces. So I'm actually just going to tie some knots in here and then weave the thread through. So basically what I do is go in where one of those bridges are, and then I just do a knot, pull it so it's all the way through, and then I'll weave this back in and out of the design a few times before I cut the excess thread off. And then I'll do that the same with the first thread. I'll sort of bead it up in here, tie it somewhere in here, and then weave it through. So I'm going to go away and do that and come back and show you the next part. Okay, so I've tidied up all the thread, and I've got my little wire or thread protector on there. So now I'm going to add the fringing part to the design. I like to work with quite a bit of thread, so here's my Nymo. I'll pull off quite a lot because I like to complete the fringe in 1 thread. If it's too much for you, just work with less thread. You can add more. And for this part, I'm not, so normally I would condition my thread, especially for this part, with running it through some beeswax a few times, just so that it keeps the thread a bit more tight and smoother through the beads. But here I want the fringing to be quite loose and quite dangly, so I don't bother. I prefer to tidy up my thread first when I attach it, so I don't have lots of extra hanging around, and just secure it into place. I'm just going to kind of pick a random area, or attempt to. Okay, so in here I'm just going to secure this thread and weave it out and trim off the excess. So basically what I'm going to be working with is this thread coming out there. Okay, so I'm going to just try and leave this beadwork. It looks fluff everywhere here, so you can see what I'm doing, but basically I'm adding the fringing part to this design. So there's a few increases in. So basically the silver beads, I'll start off with 9 in this row up the top, 10 in this row, 11 in this row, 12 in this row, and 13 in this row, and then I will go back down. So 12, 11, 10, 9. That all makes sense in a minute. So I'm just picking up 9 more beads of the silver ones we've been using. So that's 9, and I'm just going to drop them down to the end of the beadwork. Then I want 16 of the green colour, so I'm just going to thread 16 onto my needle, and I'll be back. Okay, so I have 16 of the contrast colour, and I'll just drop those down as well, so you can see where they're sitting. Okay, and now I'm going to do the design part, and let me show you. At the bottom, where we weave in and out of the colours. So I'm going to pick up 1 silver, 1 green, 1 silver, 1 green, until I have a total of 8 silver ones on my thread. So I have a total of 8 silver and 7 green, and I'm just going to drop them down to my end of my work. Okay, to secure that fringing, what we're going to do is we're going to skip the last bead we added and go back up through all of those other beads. So skip this first one, then go up through the green, and then every single bead, I'll just do it a few. I usually do a few at a time until I've gone all the way back up through those beads again. You don't want to miss any, otherwise your thread's going to be sticking out of funny places up in there, so just do this slowly. So up through last few, then back up through that one we were coming through. So basically we're going to work along this bottom row of beads here. So I'm going to go up through there. Just be careful your beadwork doesn't get looped in your thread either, like that, because when you pull it tight you're just going to have it sitting in a random place. And the idea is to make that thread disappear in there. So what I'm going to do is just situate this for the next row. So we're coming out of this first bead. I want to go back down, do the second bead in that row. Okay, and you'll notice on this bottom thread, bottom of the fringing, that bottom bead just sits like that. And the thread is looped around. So we're going to do the same for every row now, but each time until we get to the middle, we're going to add another of these silver beads. So this stays the same and this stays the same. So I've now got 10 silver beads. I'm going to add my 16 green, and then I'm going to add my pattern here that include 8 silver beads and 7 green beads. Okay, so now I've got all the beads I need on this row. I'm going to do the same as I did in the first row, and I'm going to go back through all those beads I just added, skipping the last bead. And you don't need to pull super tight. You can adjust this sort of at the top as you're going. You do want it to sort of dangle nicely, so if you pull everything really tight it won't sit. It'll sit sticking out quite rigid, so you do want to be a little bit looser with your thread than you normally would with bead weaving. And I'm just going to go back up through that second bead in the row of ladder stitch. Being careful not to get my thread entangled. And so we've got 2 nice rows, and I'm going to set up for the next row. And so the next row I'm going to be adding 11 of the silver beads at the top, and everything else is going to stay the same. If you want, so what it's going to do is kind of create this slightly triangle effect at the bottom, or an arrow. If you want that more exaggerated, rather than doing 1 bead each time extra, you could do 2, or even further, just depends on what you would like for the design. So again, I've got all the beads on that I need. Oops. And I'm just going to go back up through all of those beads I just added, except the last one, last silver one. Okay, so we've got 9, 10, 11, the next row is 12, and then the middle row is 13, and then we're going to go back down for those silver beads. So it'll be 12, 11, 10, and 9. I'm going to come back when I've got this complete, and then we can finish off the design. Well, I'll go to the middle and show you where I'm at. Okay, so I am halfway. You can see with this design, it's quite a dramatic pattern because the colours are more highly contrasted than the other pair, whereas the tones were similar. So I'm just going to go and finish off the design. So I'm going back down, so repeating all these steps on the way out. So this one will be the same, this one, and this one will be the same, and so on and so forth. Okay, so I have all my fringes done now, and I have a bit of loose thread. So I'm just going to go in like I did with the other ones and just tie it off somewhere, trim the edge, and then we can add our finding. Okay, so let's just add our finding and then we'll be done. So I have these ones, and it has a little ring on the bottom. Why is it not focusing? I'm just going to move this out of the way. There you go. Cool. So what I'm going to do is just opening it. I've got a pair of round nose pliers, and I'm just going to gently, because I don't want to distort the finding, is just open it up a little bit. So we've almost got a little hook. You can hook the earring on there, and then I'm just going to do the exact opposite of what I just did and just gently close that finding back up using my round nose pliers. And there we have a gorgeous little fringe earring. Enjoy making this project and have a bit of fun, maybe adding a few more rows for a bigger design, or adding a bit more length, seeing how long you can go, or even creating a different pattern within the beads.